So as I guess I introduced the rest of the team, my name is Wayne Beaton. I'm the director of the open source projects team here at the Eclipse Foundation. And my role is, as I see it, is to do everything that I can to help make our open source projects and our open source project committers successful at their work. Today, I want to talk a few minutes about the Eclipse license tool, which is a tool that we created to navigate, help committers navigate the IP due diligence process and frankly, navigate and implement the Eclipse Foundation's intellectual property due diligence process. The trademark disclaimers, just to make sure that everybody understands what we do here, or what the Dash license tool does. The Dash license tool finds license information for content that you provide to it. And when we say content, really, the Dash license tool knows how to turn the identifier of content into license information. It also can find some copyright information as well, but primarily we are concerned with identifying the license of content. So the easiest way to think about this is, in a Maven build, if you understand Maven, we have GAVs, which is a group ID, an artifact ID, and a version grouped together. That identifies a particular piece of content, generally on Maven Central. And based on that identifier, we know what we're talking about, and the Dash license tool knows how to turn that identifier into, or figure out what the license information associated with that license identifier is, or that content identifier is. So you can feed the Dash license tool a POM file, and it will use there's a Maven plugin or Maven Mojo that knows how to turn a POM file or collection of POM files, a Maven build, into a list of dependencies, and then from there determine the license information. It doesn't, the command line tool doesn't actually scan your code. It doesn't look for dependencies. It knows what you tell it. So again, with Maven, we have a little bit of an advantage in that we can leverage the Maven reactor to figure out all of the dependencies, and then the Dash license tool knows how to take that as input. But again, it doesn't know how to find a POM file. It only knows, again, the Maven reactor knows how the POM files are all linked together, and the Maven reactor does all that work. So we depend on, in that example, Maven understanding how to find the list of dependencies. It also knows how to read package lock files and yarn lock files and GoSum files and all sorts of other file types, and we extend that periodically as examples present themselves. So again, these files define dependencies. They define content. They provide pointers to content. In NPM, it's a pointer is a namespace / name @ version, right? So based on that, we identify the piece of content and go in and we can find information for that. The tool also knows how to read standard in, and I'll show you some examples of how that works. Right. It's worth noting too, the Dash license tool knows how, or works best with technologies that have some notion of a package manager. This is and I'll state this again later. I don't think I elaborate too much further. This works great for technologies like NPM and Maven and Cargo and those are all wonderful. Doesn't really help us at all with C and C++, because there's no package manager, there's no dependency list as far as I'm aware. As we encounter new technologies, we sort out how to deal with them. And if you have more insight into a particular technology and how the dependencies are determined for that technology, I would love to hear from you. So just quickly with Maven, the Dash license tool manifests as there's a mojo, which basically manifests as a command that you can pass to Maven. You have the ability, in this example, I'm excluding group IDs. So anything with a group ID of org.eclipse, I believe with the group ID, you can actually use wildcards as well. I think that's true. And you can actually have it generate a summary file. In this case, the -d-.summary dependency parameter tells it to generate a file called dependencies, which contains all of the results of the scan. So the result file would be for this particular dependency, we determined this license, and as far as the Eclipse Foundation is concerned, that content under that license is approved or rejected. It will give that sort of summary. It'll also point to any an issue, like we use something issues on GitLab to do due diligence. It'll point to an issue if we've used an issue to resolve it. We do leverage some other technology here too, which I'll talk about in a minute. Anyway, in this particular example, the tool has run on some Maven content and has decided that everything is fine. It found, looks like it found 20 dependencies total. It found 14 of them through Eclipse Foundation data, 6 of them through clearly defined, and determined that the information that it had was enough to proceed and move forward with an approval. I have the URL for the Dash license tool on the bottom of every page. One of the things that I've done a bad job of with the Dash license tool, but nobody seems to have complained about it, which I personally find very strange, is I haven't actually published this to Maven Central yet. So you actually have to build it locally to use it, or you can pull it off of the Eclipse Nexus instance where we do push builds. This is something that's been on my list for a little while, but frankly, the lack of complaining has made it low priority. So if this is something you believe is super important to you, complaining is the best way to make things happen. Complaining nicely is best. In the example here now, I've got another example where we actually found something. So again, I've invoked the tool, and I have asked it to build a dependencies file. I've not asked it to exclude anything. I've given it a project ID. Now the project ID technology.dash is this is the Eclipse Dash project. When we ask for a project ID, we need the ID as it is entered in our in the Eclipse Foundation database. If you don't know what that is, you can ask, and we can certainly help. EMO can certainly help with that. In this case, again, I've passed the project ID, and I've passed an IP lab token, and then I've run the tool. Now the tool has again done its scan. It's found some information. It actually found in this particular example two dependencies that we don't have license information that we are confident in about. It may have found something, but maybe determined that we either don't know the license or the license isn't one that we're comfortable with, or something to that effect. So what this has done by adding the project ID and the IP lab token, it's gone ahead and created issues, and I'm only showing the first one at the bottom of this example. It's created an issue on our IP lab instance to request that the IP team do a review. And I'll talk about how that all works later. It checks to see if there's already open and on IP lab, it won't create a new one. So you can rerun this as many times as you want, and it will just always have the same result. It won't create additional issues for the same content. Once we close that issue, if the resolution isn't something you like and you run the tool again, it will create another issue and force us to look at it again. Anyway, that's that. The IP lab token is a GitLab token that you get from the Eclipse Foundation's GitLab instance. There are instructions for this on the Dash license README. And I've provided pointers to this on every slide, and again at the end. And of course, if you have any questions about where to find all of this, we can help. There's links to this basically in every bit of documentation we have. To request a review, you have to be a committer. One of the things we found is people actually find this tool kind of useful, and we found it being used for all sorts of things, and we really just don't have the bandwidth to do IP clearing for everybody in the world. So if you are a committer, this will work. I ask that you please only use this to review Eclipse Foundation project content. The Eclipse Foundation does not provide reviews, IP review for other people's products, regardless of your membership status. We do reviews for Eclipse project content. Right now, the tool doesn't actually check for a project ID that's valid, but that's likely an extension we're going to add in the future. So getting that project ID correct is important. Again, this is more just a matter of throttling the content that comes to us so that we're not reviewing things that are not project content, and kind of just doing the minimum that we can to mitigate against too much work. The way these specify the parameters is different in Maven than it is from the command line. I've showed them here. Again, this is all in the documentation, and of course, you can actually ask the command line tool for its parameters by sending the minus, giving it the minus help option. So when we actually create issues, they appear in IP Lab, and they'll look a little something like this. Initially, the top one there is an example of it's unadorned by labels. When they're first created, there is no labels. There's a processor that runs. It finds the things that don't have labels but do have a valid ID, and it runs them through a process, which I'll describe in a few minutes. You'll see that the rest of them have some labels on them indicating that they have been reviewed by Dash. There's scan code results connected to those issues, and that further investigation by the IP team is required. You may notice in some cases that help wanted will appear here. Help wanted means we couldn't find the source code. So, and we require assistance. The IP team has some skills in this regard and generally very often does a very good job of finding the source code. But if one of these help wanted shows up on an issue that you create through the Dash license tool, you will expedite the process of review if you can help us find the source code. One of the things that we try to do too is when in these cases where we can't find the source code, if you point us to it, very often we fix the tool so that it can find it next time. One of our challenges is we don't necessarily know all of the sources of source. So we depend on we leverage whatever assistance we can get from committers to figure that out and improve the quality of the tool. I decided to show some examples with Python primarily because I've gotten a few requests for Python over the last couple of days, and they're kind of fresh in my brain. The first thing you need to know about Dash license tool and Python is the Dash license tool has no idea about Python. It doesn't know anything about Python dependencies. It's written in Java. It isn't written in Python. It literally knows nothing about Python. The Dash license tool does know, though, what you give it, or knows what to do with content that you give it. So in this case, Python does know how to get a list of dependencies for content through the pip dep tree command is the tool. I should probably also say that I don't know Python, so I am dependent on my ability to do research without actually having a project in Python to work on, and the charity of committers who do understand Python. But pipe dep tree with a particular set of parameters produces a list of dependencies that are a list of identifiers of dependencies. We pipe that through a couple of Linux command line tools, sed being the primary one, to convert it into a form that we can use. sort and uniqueify that list. For some reason, I like doing sort and unique separately, but you can make fun of me if you'd like. And then we pipe that through the dash license tool. So in this case, we found some Python dependencies that we had not encountered previously, and this would be an example where we would potentially create reviews to have the IP team look at them. So just what's happening here, just so you can have some sense of how this actually works. The pip dep tree command just gives me a list of dependencies in a particular format that Python generates. And the sed command that I pipe it through knows how to turn that into something that the dash license tool understands. The dash license tool uses, at its fundamental level, it uses clearly defined IDs. Now, this is actually something I've been reevaluating lately, but for the time being, clearly defined is the ID, the underlying ID format that we use. So in this case, we're assuming that all of these Python content come from PyPy, which is a software repository for Python, and converts them into clearly defined IDs on that resource. Now, we're actually finding that this is not exactly right. So we may need some assistance from some people who understand Python better than I do, but I'll defer that discussion for another time. So, the extension of this then is, so what we're doing is we're piping this list of IDs into the dash license tool. The dash license tool can take pretty much anything as input through standard in. So in this case, we can just echo a clearly defined ID. You can actually echo a Maven Gav or an NPM coordinate. You can give it a bunch of different formats just through the standard in, and it knows what to do with them. If it doesn't know what to do with them, it'll tell you. You can also, at the bottom there, you can feed it a file. So in some cases, this is actually the example. I think we may need to we may need to do things with C and C++ in particular, is have a file that lists all of the dependencies, and just make the project team will have to manually keep that up to date and just pipe it through the dash license tool periodically. Again, that's just me thinking off the cuff at this point. I haven't really investigated that with any detail or depth. Right. So again, the dash license tool, we have a Maven plugin because somebody contributed it, and it works pretty well. There's there's always problems with everything, of course, but the Maven plugin works pretty well. And then basically, again, we read some certain file formats. Like I said, package lock files, yarn lock files, GoSum files. The tool just knows how to read those file formats. But then anything else, it's just pushing in, just giving it, a file, or just giving it standard in content that each line is the identification of a dependency. In fact, originally we just used the Maven dependencies plugin to get a list of Maven dependencies and pipe that through the command line. Anyway, so how it actually works, the command line, or the dash license tool, runs on the committer workstation or on the build. We have a number of projects that have this incorporated into their builds. When it runs, it determines all of, determines the IDs of the content that it's reviewing, fires them at our license check service, which is running on Eclipse Foundation servers. That checks the Foundation intellectual property database, and whatever information it finds there, it returns to the tool. If the tool finds, after that operation, there are outstanding items or things that require further information, the tool then queries clearly defined database, and we have a criteria for that. If the licenses that are reported by clearly defined are all on our approved list, and the license score in clearly defined is, I believe, 60 or higher, we just approve it. Anything lower than that, we decide isn't valid enough for approval, and we then it's up, basically it's up to it requires further investigation. If the tool is parameterized to do so, it will then push review requests to our IP lab Git repository as issues. There is a scanner service, which again I'll talk about a bit more in a second here, which scans for content, and if it determines that the licenses are all approved and if the tool has confidence that the licenses are well defined, it will approve that information and push it to the Foundation's IP database. And if not, it annotates the issue to bring attention to the IP team to deal with it. It's worth noting that the part where the scanner service feeds information to the Foundation database does have some latency. It's usually just minutes, but there is a period of time where if you do a query after something has been approved, it may not yet know. It's on the order of minutes. So there are some cases where duplicate requests get created. The Dash license tool tends to notice these things. Again, there's always this sort of short window where it might miss something, but it will notice if something's a duplicate and just close it, just to deal with that. Unfortunately, as best as I can determine, there's no way to get full transactional semantics on this. So there's always going to be a little bit of a lag in between a certain request being produced and then the results of that request being available. The back end, what the service in the back end does is it for each issue that gets created, it tries to find metadata for that thing, and that basically will look at the different software repositories. So it looks at Maven Central, Maven Repository, NPM. Oh, okay. Are we still good? Oh, okay. Sorry, someone joining the call just confused me. I'm apparently very easily distracted. Carrying on. So it finds metadata. Based on the metadata and the state of the issue, it finds the source archive. It will download the source archive, expand the source archive. It actually digs in if there's zip files inside zip files. It expands everything out. Runs a source scan using a tool called Scan Code Toolkit, and now analyzes the results and then updates the issue accordingly. Again, if in the analysis of the scan code results, it determines that the licensing is pretty clear, it just approves the issue and pushes data to the Foundation database. If not, it annotates the issue accordingly. With again, either as I showed earlier, potentially a help wanted tag if it can't find the source, or IP team review required if there's enough information, if it's been able to get information from scan code but just needs a little help from the IP team to push it over. If you look at some of these reports, they're summaries of the scan code. The full scan code results are in many cases megabytes, so we decided not to retain them. But so we summarize them in a comment on the IP lab. One of the things that happens periodically is when we scan something like Node, the scan code report summary is too big for a comment and it fails. I haven't fixed this yet, so this is something we need to identify and sort out how to deal with. Finding source, the first thing it does is it looks in the issue description. This is actually most helpful. The Dash license tool doesn't actually provide any information there anymore. At one point it did, but it doesn't anymore. But if you create a source issue or if you create an issue on IP Lab or update an existing issue on IP Lab, if you set a source entry in the markdown, I showed the format there, square bracket source, square bracket, round bracket, URL, round bracket, that's the URL that the tool, the backend, will use to find the source. It currently only supports archives, which is fine because that actually tends to work for most of the time. One of the things we have on our list is to have it know how to just grab a Git repository. That's pretty straightforward. It's just a matter of actually implementing it. You can provide either an absolute URL to a resource, or you can just drag and drop a zip file onto the description, and it will know what to do with it with a relative URL for an attachment in GitLab. Yeah, even if you, yeah, it's pretty robust, even if you specify it with incorrect markdown. It actually does a pretty good job of figuring it out. But anyway, I can talk about examples of that if anybody cares. We tried to make this as resilient as possible. So anyway, first off, we check there. If we have decided to hint the tool that we know where the source is, and here's where you can find it, that's where it starts. Otherwise, it uses the metadata that it's gathered to find a source pointer. In the case of most, it'll use the source URL. If it's npm and there's no source URL, it will look at the distribution URL. The nature of Node is that the distribution we have found tends to have the license information in it. The distribution actually tends to be better because it actually contains effectively the source for just the content that you're actually using. Source URLs tend to have lots of extra stuff that we have to parse out. Finally, if it can't find the source anywhere, it asks for help. Just quickly what this looks like. Here's an example of a IP lab request description that we received yesterday, actually. This here again is a source pointer. And again, just needs a URL that points to something. It does a pretty good job of finding it itself, but again, when it doesn't, if you can, or when you're creating an issue yourself manually, maybe know more than we do or want to help. Providing the source URL is this is the format. It really just looks for that particular link of that particular format. You can have it in a bullet list or embed it in text. It doesn't really matter. It's just a simple regular expression check for that content of that form in the description. The metadata, for example, this is I can't remember. Well, this is a request that came in again. I think it was yesterday, and we go to Maven Central and we found some information. We actually, as part of grabbing the metadata, we'll go and grab the POM file, and if there's license information in the POM file, we'll report that here, pointers to their source code repository. This is just handy information when our IP analysts are doing their investigation. They may need to dig around. Sometimes it's good to know what the repository thinks the license is. That kind of gives us a little bit of a help, a little bit of a hint. If you want more information about the tool, there's a couple of links here. There's some content in the handbook recently updated. The Dash license tool itself is on GitHub. You can find it there. And the IP lab is here at the last link on it's on the Eclipse Foundation's GitLab instance. And with that, my 30-minute, 10-minute talk is the formal part is complete, and I'm going to stop the recording.